It is Graham here, living the dream in 2020, and if you watched our last video, a road trip to Ireland, you will know that Fiona and I are here at my mother's house, or my childhood home here in Newtonabbey in the outskirts of Belfast in Northern Ireland. And today we're going to do something we've not done in a very long time. We're going to head up to the Giants Causeway, I believe one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. It's somewhere I've been to many times, but not in nearly 20 years. And I've never done it here on YouTube. So come with Fiona and I as we take you on another road trip to the north coast of Ireland and the Giants Causeway. As we left Woodford at my mother's place on the 59-mile journey to the Giants Causeway, we really had no idea what the weather had in store for us. It certainly was dry, it was slightly overcast, however, it was very warm and humid. As we headed towards the M2 motorway at Glengormley, our plan was to stop for coffee first in Ballycastle in just over 1 hour's time. And here we are, approaching the Seven Towers roundabout, Ballymena, and I know that'll be lost on anyone not from this part of the world. I know that I said this in the last video, but the road network in Northern Ireland has improved massively in the 23 years that I've been gone. In fact, the motorway gets you to within 15 miles of Ballycastle, and our first stop for the day on our road trip to the north coast of Antrim. Ballycastle would make its way into the history books on the 3rd of June 1898 when Marconi broadcast his first radiogram signal. I remember as a child spending a week in a caravan holidaying here in Ballycastle in the early 1970s. I think it would have been 1973, on the 75th anniversary of Marconi's first radio broadcast. My father had been involved in ham radio most of his life, and therefore it would come as no surprise that he would certainly be involved in this type of event taking place in Northern Ireland during the early 1970s. And then, during the 1980s, I was heavily involved in CB radio, and in fact, that is how I met Fiona in 1984 at a CB radio event in Cumbernauld in central Scotland. In CB radio speak, that would have been called an eyeball. And Fiona and I would get our coffee at the Marine Hotel here in Ballycastle. As we left Ballycastle, we passed the house where Marconi made that very first radio broadcast in June 1898. And then we would drive past the caravan park where I think we spent that family holiday in the early 1970s. For those of you watching this video and have never been to Northern Ireland but you think this coastline looks familiar, well, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you will, because this is where that TV series was filmed. In fact, Game of Thrones was responsible for putting Northern Ireland and this particular part of Ulster on the tourist map, and along with it the hundreds of millions of pounds investments into this part of the world, which suffered for nearly 20 years in what we simply knew as the Troubles. In the late 1990s came the Good Friday Agreement along with it, peace to this province. I always remember this part of the world being extremely beautiful. And if it hadn't been July 2020 and us being in the middle of the global coronavirus pandemic, this road would have been bumper to bumper with tour buses bringing Europeans, Americans and Japanese to also walk in the shadow of giants, following in the footsteps of their heroes from the Game of Thrones. However, as Fiona and I arrive at the car park and the visitor centre at the Giants Causeway, we can see how hard the coronavirus pandemic has been to this part of the world during 2020. Those of you wishing to visit the Giants Causeway and making your own way there by car, if you want to park in the official visitors car park, you need to book it at least 24 hours in advance. You guessed it, Fiona and I didn't. So we made our way down to the local steam railway station and paid £8 to park in their car park before starting the long walk down the coast path to the Giants Causeway. There is normally a small minibus shuttle service ferrying those to and from the causeway and the visitor centre unable to make the walk themselves. I do think this was another casualty of coronavirus. And after we walked in the shadow of giants on the causeway, Fiona and I took the decision to take the slightly longer walk back to the car via the coastal pathway and the 162 steps up to the cliff top. Just in case you're wondering, it turned out a really gorgeous, warm, sunny July day here at the Giants Causeway, and I certainly regretted not wearing shorts. and after that long walk, Fiona and I decided to have some lunch. But unfortunately, the Causeway Hotel was yet another casualty of the coronavirus pandemic, so Fiona and I headed back to the car, and we found the Smugglers Inn open, a gorgeous pub and restaurant only 2 minutes drive from the Giants Causeway en route to Bushmills. For me, and no doubt countless others, Bushmills is famous for one thing, and that is, of course, Irish whiskey. Fiona and I last visited Bushmills and the Bushmills distillery, I think it was in 2011, and we did take a tour. And yes, we would recommend anyone visiting Bushmills for the first time should visit their famous distillery. However, Fiona and I wanted an ice cream, so we're better to get a pokey hat, a 99, than Portrush, the tourist capital of the North Coast. For any child growing up in Northern Ireland, Portrush is a very important place, and it certainly was for me back in the 1970s. As we left the car and made the short walk down this street towards the promenade, you could have heard the screaming coming from the Barry's Amusements. And while Portrush was no M&D's, Thorpe Park or Magic Mountain, for any child growing up in Northern Ireland during the 1970s and 1980s, there was no better place on the planet than Portrush. Sadly, in July 2020, Barry's is closed. Its roller coaster and dodgems all parked up, and the screams from excited kids and teenagers have all fallen silent. But the Ferris wheel is still running, and despite the air temperature being in the low to mid 70s, if you wanted to venture into the sea for a swim or a surf, wetsuits were most definitely in order. And after finding that all-important ice cream, it was time for Fiona and I to head back to the car. And this is where I'm going to bring this episode of our Northern Ireland road trip to a close. Thank you for watching.